How's it going, guys? John, the basic expert here, and I thought for this week's video, this will be a quick one. It'll be a short one, but it's one that kind of inspired by a comment in my comment section. This isn't to pick on the guy. It's just to get, it's something that I think I need to touch on, and I can't expect everyone, my channel's not that big, to be aware that I have a 0E clone that implements Chainmail into the game, into the 3LBBs. And so I do it a particular way, but there's lots of people, and there's lots of people for the last 50 years, you know, that have their own sort of opinion about how they think Chainmail should be implemented into the 3LBBs. And the 3LBBs, the original Dungeons and Dragons rules, are not entirely concise on what is to be what. And what aspects of Chainmail and how you implement those things in. So when I made Whitebox, for example, I pretty much did it to my taste. And so when you look at Whitebox, everything within it is it doesn't necessarily break any rules. Like, everything is inspired by something found in Chainmail or in 3LBBs, and it's sort of my interpretation of that. Whereas, you know, other people have different interpretations about how they want to handle things. And some people, I think, dislike the D20 for various reasons, or they just prefer D6s, which Chainmail uses D6s for a lot of its resolutions. Either a D6 dice pool method, or the man-to-man tables, which are 2D6, and you're kind of trying to hit a target number. And side note, I think this is what it shows how Mark Miller of Traveller fame, how he played D&D, because you can kind of see that he took that 2D6 aspect from the man-to-man tables and applied it to Traveller. But that's another point. How do we implement the Chainmail aspects into 0E? You could go my route, which is I've sort of universalized the D20 and produced a sort of proto AD&D game, which I think is very cool. I like it. I don't have a hate for a D20. I don't mind the D20. I think the D20 is fine. It's a perfectly serviceable dice for the resolution of various aspects of the game in 0E. I don't have a problem with it necessarily, but some people want to implement things differently. They use the man-to-man tables, or they use the dice pool system in various ways, or they use a combination of all of these systems. Or they neglect, or they get rid of the D20 altogether and use some combo of man-to-man or the dice pool system for mass combat that's found in Chainmail. And who's right, who's wrong? I think that I will come out and say that my way is not technically 100% correct. My way, and the way that I'll say this, is that I've always felt when I made Whitebox, with the help of a lot of my friends on the Guilded server, the goal there was to make a game like, if all I had was Chainmail and the 3LBBs, how would I run this game? It's 1974. I have Chainmail. I bought it because the Whitebox, the 3LBBs told me that I needed Chainmail. So I have Chainmail. I have the 3LBBs. I've read both, and now I need to figure out what to do. And for me, I picked the D20 for a number of reasons, despite it not being maybe entirely correct, and we'll get as to why that is, and what is maybe the correct objective way to play it based on drafts found in this book here, the original, The Makings of Original Dungeons & Dragons. I chose the D20 because it's, one, familiar, and I wanted to make a version of 0E that was familiar, but also different from things like Whitebox, FMAG, or Swords and Wizardry. I wanted to avoid what my friend Clerics Where Ringmail says is Moldvayan revisionism, which is looking at BX or Moldvay or some later edition of D&D and reading that back into the 0E rules and sort of coming to different conclusions. And so one of the things that we come to is, for instance, fighting capability definitely bumps up your character beyond that of what a BX character is, or even in a lot of respects what an advanced character is in AD&D. And the interesting thing, though, is that if you still keep what's called the alternative combat system, which is the D20 resolution method we're all familiar with, and you implement some of these chainmailisms over the top of it, you do get a proto AD&D game, and it's actually quite a heroic game. It's actually quite fun. And you implement things like weapon class and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to make it familiar, so the D20 is there, but I wanted to try and smooth over things with a universalized combat resolution system, which is the D20. And so I feel like the D20 scales to 1 to 10 or 20, however you want to ratio it as far as miniatures on the battlefield are concerned, or tokens on your BTT, or however you're playing. I wanted it to scale between that so that it was familiar, and maybe instead of keeping track of hit points, what you're doing is, a hit is a kill when you're in mass combat, for example. It's 1 hit die or 6 points of damage, essentially, total removed from a character on the battlefield. So you have a group of footmen and you have a group of goblins, and they're fighting at each other, and the footmen in their unit deal 6 hits that land on the goblins. That's 6 goblins that are killed in that round of combat. It just makes it simple, easy to adjudicate these sorts of things. And so that's why I went the route that I went. But I'll again come out and say that my way isn't, I don't think, looking back and researching things based on this book here, I don't think that my way is even technically correct. And I don't think even a lot of the ways that I see a lot of my friends that maybe do different things is necessarily the objective correct way. Now, I'll say, because things are so vague in 0E, it's hard to say that they're actually wrong necessarily, because nothing that they're doing necessarily breaks the rules. And the D20 system is called the alternative combat system within 0E, so it's there as an alternative, right, to the chainmail aspects. And I'll say one final thing in regards to why I went with a D20 in 0E. Every creature within the Volume 2, within Book 2, has an armor class, but not all of those creatures appear on the fantasy combat table. And this is actually a point where I think we'll get to the objective correct way to play based on a draft. But it came to a point where you either have to find a similar creature on the fantasy combat table to use to make it a pure chainmail game. So there's some creatures in the book, in the 3LBBs, that do not appear on that fantasy combat table. You have to find a close analog to something on that table to use it, and that's just not ideal. To me, you end up homebrewing, and that's where we get to this variability of different interpretations and different rules, and I wanted to avoid that. So I made the decision of every creature has an armor class, so we need to stick with the alternative combat system. So that was another reason why I selected that. Now, let's get into why that is in this book here. So, on page 114 of the book, we're in the 1973 draft of Dungeons & Dragons, and on page 22 of that draft, it says men versus men. If there are small numbers of numbers fighting, it will be most interesting to use the man-to-man melee tables, referring to chainmail. If a large number are fighting, the combat tables based on the troop ratio of 1 to 20 should be used. So, again, that's the dice pool system. So we have men versus fantasy figures. It is suggested that the 1 to 20 combat tables be used when men scoring 1 hit point when they hit, and fantasy figures scoring hits equal to a die roll 1 to 6. Of course, some fantasy creatures cannot be hit by normal men, and no hit points will be scored against them. See the fantasy versus fantasy section below. So we have another chainmailism here where we're going to get into rolling the d6. Everything does a d6 of damage, and this is why all hit die in 0E are on a d6. This is where it gets interesting, and we get to the fantasy versus fantasy section here. Because the vast number of fantastic creatures and levels of men, a matrix to show hits is totally impractical. We know because we tried, but with 70 or more categories, it becomes too unwieldy to handle. We therefore recommend that a system utilizing a 20-sided die increments of 5% be adopted. The basis of this will be the assumption that a man will require a score of 90%, or better to hit an opponent in plate mail and shield. Armor classes will be given in such a way to indicate their efficiency, viz. Deduct their number from 20, and the base number to hit them is obtained. Thus, plate mail and shield is class 2, and 2 minus 20 equals 18. Each fantasy figure is listed below, giving its base armor class, along with various other data regarding it. Armor classes and what scores the various levels of fighting men need to score a hit are, and then it gives you the table on the next page that we're all sort of familiar with. where you have your attack matrix and you have your this is the number to hit for AC whatever, based on subtracting it from that. So what we have here in this draft, and this text did not make it into the final draft of 0E, into the 3 LBBs. And it's kind of a shame, because I think it would have put to rest a lot of the disputes that we've had over the years, in regards to what is the correct way of implementing chainmail. And I think this is probably the most interesting, it's an interesting way of implementing it. And it's one I haven't really seen too many people advocate for. Everyone either advocates for what I do, which is the D20 for everything, for every aspect, or ignore the alternative combat system altogether and use only chainmail and the resolution systems in Chainmail to do that. And there's not very many people I see that explain this exact way of implementing the alternative combat system with the chainmail aspects based on all these factors. Now, do I think this is a good system or a good way of playing the game? I don't particularly care for this. So even after reading this isn't something where I'd feel like I need to update Whitebox to accommodate this. So that to me, I prefer the way that I presented the game, obviously. And it's not just because I designed it that way. It's just I legitimately prefer that. And I think that it kind of is in line, I think, with eventually how Gary would perceive the game in some respects, given how Greyhawk would come about and how AD&D would eventually come about much later. So, in my opinion, this was the way when the rules were written. This method is the correct objective way, using chainmail for men versus men and men versus fantasy figures. But fantasy versus fantasy is something where you have to use the alternative combat system in there. And again, I think it's kind of a shame that this didn't make it into the final draft of things, worded in this exact way. But I think it would have solved a lot of problems for people. It would have told them a bit more, and it makes it abundantly clear in this iteration in the 1973 draft that chainmail is 100% a requirement to play 0E. That cannot be. I think that's undisputed at this point. I think anyone that says that chainmail isn't needed, well, sure, you can play some sort of game, but you're not playing this game as it's originally intended by the creators to be played. So, the fact too is in this book too, it talks about how Dave Arneson sort of he explicitly used chainmail to run his Blackmore campaign, which was the proto D&D game. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. I want to shout out a sponsor that I have for the channel now. If you're interested in getting dice for your games, you need a new dice set, you want a fun dice set, may I suggest Only Crits. They sent me this nice set of die. They sent in this nice, like kind of leathery bag, and I got some duck dice, which you guys know as a duck enthusiast myself, as an owner of pet ducks. I saw those dice and I was like, you guys got to send me those ones. Those have to be the dice that you send me. So I really like the dice. They seem to roll really well. They're like a little bigger than some other dice that I have. So they're a little bigger than maybe some other standard dice, and I actually kind of appreciate that. Easier to read, I think, because they're a little bigger. And I like the look, the feel, and the prices seem fairly reasonable for sort of a little bit more higher quality premium dice as well. So use my code TBE at checkout and the link below, and you help support the channel. And I get a little bit of support based on your sale there. It helps the channel out. You get a new set of dice that's kind of fun. So make sure you check that out. Also, check out thebasicexpert.com for merch, my zines, and other things. And keep an eye out in the future for Whitebox. I'm doing a boxed set for it. You can get the PDF for free right now on DriveThruRPG. Link to my DriveThruRPG is also below in the video description. You can get Whitebox there, see what it's all about, what I'm basing the game on. There's going to be a new version. I'm trying to be a little bit more concise, a little bit more clear, and a little bit more organized than that. It's being split up into 3 books. And the Kickstarter, I'm going to have the pre-launch page up, I'm hoping within the week or so. So we're going to start ramping that up. I'm going to start shilling that. And if you want to interview me about Whitebox, I'm more than happy to come on stream. for anyone out there that's interested in talking about old school D&D, about Zero E, and my interpretation of it as we've discussed here. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Make sure you like, subscribe, share the video, and if you want to support on Patreon, my Guilded server, or right here on YouTube, it's greatly appreciated. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.